there? Somebody in the room?
Oh, that's me. Sorry,
Oh,
I'm getting. A friend of mine wants me to play SimCity with him right now.
Ha! And that's how we begin.
Uh,
Jonathan's friend wants him to play SimCity with him. Welcome to the Post the Place Show Hangout. I am here with Jonathan and Ozzy and, of course, Ilana. And we are going to be talking a little bit more about what was talked about on the place. And what we did was we disassembled and tried to crystallize the thoughts that Ozzy has about the presuppositional argument. And Ozzy did a fantastic job. Now, the funny thing is, Ozzy, one thing that I said to start off with was that you sound like you had been practicing, or you had a lot of experience saying what you were saying. And I had spent all day today editing the previous hangout that you had with John F. McDropout and Alana. So, and the way that you were talking, it seemed like it was the first time you were kind of wrestling with these ideas out loud, and you were kind of spitballing, and you were really letting yourself go with your thought processes out loud. And today, you were like, and this, bam, 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 truth, bam, 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 bam.
oh, that's what you meant by it. Yeah, I didn't quite understand. I thought you were talking about sort of my history and how I came by presuppositionalism because I had.
Your response was beautiful.
Okay, well, yeah, I didn't quite understand your question, but yeah, my that 3.5 hour hangout talk with John F. McDropout was absolutely unprepared and unrehearsed. It was just we're just going to talk about this, and if we think that there's anything worthwhile in here, we'll throw it up on YouTube, and a lot of people have been liking it, so I've been very gratified by that. But I have since then talked about it with a number of people in some hangouts, and I spoke to some people on Fundamentally Flawed last night, and
Yes.
a little bit tonight on the Magic Sandwich Show before coming on your show. So yeah, it's safe to say that some of these things are sounding a little bit rehearsed, I'm afraid. Nothing I said tonight was as complete as I would have liked, but maybe it was a little more polished. I don't know.
I think that it sounded great. If I can pay you a little bit of compliment,
No, thank
you. What I'd like to say is, it sounded very good because, like I said, I'm doing compare contrast, and what I'm not saying is that it sounded bad in the 3.5 hour hangout. What I am saying is that compared to the 3.5 hour hangout, your responses were even more articulate. They were much more polished, and you were able to get your ideas across in a more concise way.
Oh, good.
And you were a great communicator. In talking to Dr. Jones in a way that you obviously didn't, you were obviously shooting from the hip and spitballing.
Yeah.
In the original hangout.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. Absolutely true. Yeah.
Because here's the position I found myself in. I spent today synopsizing what you were saying in the in your more loquacious version of your position or your explanations, and tonight of course you did it better than me, and I was just like, this is great. I'm going to be able to edit this and have even more concise chunks of the very things that I was trying to do earlier today.
Oh, well, so, good. As long as I made your job easier, Chris.
Oh yeah. Well, and that's all that's really important, Ozzy. Yeah. But what I wanted to say was I want to talk a little bit more about I want to talk maybe about some angles that aren't as played out for you,
sure.
that maybe you don't have as polished a response for, and
sure.
that might be a little bit more fun to sink your teeth into.
Sure.
Does that sound? Are you ready to play?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay. What I found to be the most important aspect of what you were saying, and if we can start with what I consider the most important aspect first, is you cannot evaluate the Christian or presuppositional worldview using a non-Christian or presuppositional standard?
Yeah, I think that's incorrect.
Okay, say it the correct way.
No. I mean, I think
Oh.
I think that that claim is incorrect.
Oh, okay.
Not the way you put it. The standard presuppositional claim is that the only way to evaluate a claim is, strictly speaking, from inside of it.
Yes. But is the claim that I put forth a logical extension of that?
Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
the reason why I put it that way is I think that is something that people can sink their teeth into, as much as they disagree with it. As much as they're like, what? Hold on a second. That's record being pulled, or needle being pulled off the record. It's a starting point for unraveling the onion, I think, in a way that people can really sink their teeth into. So you start with that. You can't evaluate the presuppositional worldview without using the presuppositional worldview. And so then when you put it that way, it's just like, or the Christian worldview without using the Christian worldview, or by using a non-Christian standard, I should say. When you put it that way, it's like, well then, so I can't use the things that I think are important? No, you can't.
Well, part of the presuppositionalist position is that I mean, they reject the autonomy of human reason. They think that human reasoning has to be subordinate to the will of God, and the idea is that your cognitive faculties are somehow corrupted by sin, and that it's only through a process of regeneration via the Holy Spirit and a good Christian life that, and by the grace of God, that you sort of your mental faculties come into their own and start operating properly. I mean, that borders on a grotesque ad hominem when they say that. And of course, if it were true, then I'm not in a position to argue. But if I'm not in a position to argue, I needn't waste my time with them, right? The argument kind of cuts both ways, I can do the same thing with them, right? Or the problem with you is that you're sort of trapped in an ideology, and I mean, there's ad hominem is about other people's minds not working right are very, very easy, and they don't get us anywhere. You can't have a proper conversation that way. This is simply an excuse that you can give so as to not listen to any objections. It's a rationalization for dismissing people. And when people talk to me that way, I simply don't put up with it. I can say, well, you're free to believe that, but you're either going to hear what I have to say, or we're not going to have a conversation. You don't get to declare that everything that I'm saying and everything that's coming out of my mouth is worthless because it happens to be coming out of my mouth. That's not on. And so that's fine. Go ahead. Go preach to somebody else who's a sucker. I'm not one of those. So go ahead. But
that's the personal standard. That's the personal standard that everybody needs to have.
Yeah.
But they trick you into having a normal conversation. They ask colloquial questions. Hey, can I ask you about? Hey, can you be wrong about everything you think you know? Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, of course, yeah. I'm just going to be intellectually honest. Oh, well then, that logically plays out to mean ba 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 ba. Whoa, oh, hey, how do you know that? Whoa, are you absolutely certain about that? Oh, I don't know. Oh, hold on a second. These are things that I don't know about, but I'm going to dig my heels in and take a position because you kind of tapped a psychological human interactive button in me that is that you're taking advantage of.
Yeah. People feel trapped. There's a panicky feeling that people experience when they feel they're being run over in an argument, and you don't have to be right to in an argument to make people feel that. I mean, I can, when I'm talking about a subject I know something quite a bit about, make a person feel pretty small. I can utterly dominate them just through force of personality and sort of presenting a confident air. Anybody can do that. It doesn't take much, right? And people get intimidated and they get panicked when that happens. The next thing you know, they start casting about for any way of getting out of the trap that either they recognize they've fallen into or are in danger of falling into. There's two things operating here. One is just sort of that psychological thing. Nobody likes to feel humiliated and dominated that way in an argument. The other thing that's happening, though, is that people really do recognize. They start to get an inkling of, oh, wait a minute, I'm not really as secure in what I thought I knew. It's really hard to defend what I thought I could defend. Most of us think that we can defend our deepest convictions. That's why they're our deepest convictions. We really feel confident about them. And then we discover in the course of these discussions that, oh boy, this is really hard work. It's not as, and even if I had thought through it at some point, sometimes it's been a long time since you thought about it and you can't articulate it now. As soon as that starts to happen, you get this sort of terrified feeling that,
Mm-hmm.
and
then
people make mistakes.
You point out that this is an advantage of the new brand of presuppositionalists, in the sense that they are challenge people to think about epistemology.
Well, that's the good that you can take of it. I mean, if you happen to be on the receiving end of this, there's no reason to sort of walk away, feeling ashamed of yourself, right? There's, I mean, in some sense, this is sort of making a virtue out of a bad situation here, or virtue out of a vice. That's not the expression, but there's an expression that I'm not articulating right now.
I'm all about mixed metaphors. It's fine.
But anyway, making a virtue of necessity is what I'm trying to say. There we go. So what you've got to do, I think, is take the sort of the lesson that is to be learned here. And it's a lesson in intellectual modesty, right? It seems to me that too many of us think that we're very rational, and I think we atheists have really are most guilty of this, because there's an echo chamber in religious communities that sort of reinforce their beliefs, but in the atheistic skeptical community, there's an echo chamber operative as well, and it's one that says that we get our beliefs by reason and evidence, and that we're rational and that we don't take anything on faith, and I think that's just hogwash. Yeah, I mean that is just a bragging.
Yeah, I like the direction you're taking this conversation, because I have a little bit of an extreme opinion that humans are irrational.
Yeah, yeah, we are irrational, but we can exercise reason, and we have sort of moments of rationality, and we can sort of, as a civilization, as a culture, we can sort of claw our way towards states of greater clarity and reasonableness, just like we can sort of claw our way towards moral progress over time. It's not easy, and being a skeptical thinker and a critical thinker is the work of a lifetime. It's, you don't just declare that, okay, from now on I'm going to be reasonable. That doesn't work. You have to sort of slowly build up all of the skills in the critical thinking toolbox, and this starts at first by playing games like Name That Fallacy, where you're able to identify the errors and reasoning of other people. But hopefully at some point you graduate from being able to play Name That Fallacy in other people's views to recognize them in your own. And almost no one can recognize fallacies in their own thinking. I mean, I'm no better at it than anybody else.
Everybody has blind spots.
Yeah. I mean, we really are. I mean, confirmation bias and the attribution bias, where you attribute. This is another thing that we do a lot, actually. Well, you'll probably know about attribution theory, but for those people who aren't familiar with attribution theory, it's this model of human interpersonal relations, where you tend to assume that the things that you believe you came by good reasons, and the way other people arrive at their beliefs tends to be through motivations and causes, and not through good reasoning. And people do this even for people who think like themselves. So, an atheist might think, well, I came by my atheism because I saw the poor reasoning that I and other religious people were exercising. And so I came by my atheism and skepticism honestly, and the proper way. But they might even point to another fellow atheist and say, no, he just doesn't like where religion's constraints on him and stuff like that, right? People do that all the time, even for people who share their own beliefs very closely, but we tend to be less charitable in our attributions of how people arrive at their beliefs. The more distant their beliefs are from ours, we tend to be more charitable with people who have closer belief. So that's something to be on guard of, you know, and people will recognize people succumbing to attribution bias in other people and have a hard time
Oh,
recognizing
certainly.
attribution bias in themselves. So
And I think that that's super important to and you are singing my song. I'm so glad that you are cognizant of cognitive biases and heuristics and how they and how being a rational person is a craft that you have to hone over a lifetime with skills that are tools in a toolbox. And how most people don't dedicate their lives to attempting to be rational, and a lot of our decisions are mental shortcuts, and how we're not good at thinking outside of the mundane, because evolutionarily speaking, that's all the range of what we had to think about was the mundane. So thinking about the micro or the nano or the macro or the cosmo sometimes is baffling.
yeah,
So it's, so when it comes to, like, when we get to evidential questions, 6,000, yeah, that seems like a lot.
yeah,
4.5 billion, oh man, I can't even imagine it. 16 billion, this is the age of the Earth and the age of the universe. I can't even think about, 16 billion of anything. These numbers boggle the mind, and you kind of have to take them on a certain amount of, and I'm going to say it, faith.
yeah. That's a different sense of the word faith than sort of religious faith.
Yes.
But yeah, what happens? Well,
Go ahead.
I
What's
just want to
going
go.
on in your mind right now?
I want to go back to the something that that you said about sort of the toolbox and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
The way I like to characterize all of that is that critical thinking is a habit of mind. You have to think of it as a discipline. What you want to do, I mean, I don't mean to set myself up as a model of how to do this because I'm not, and it's not false modesty. I'm really not.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, critical thinking, you want it to become kind of reflexive. It's like learning a martial art. You just repeat the move over and over and over and over again until it's an instinct in you, right? It's like cultivating virtue, like moral virtue, right? People, if you're always excusing yourself, in telling white lies, if you're always forgiving yourself for doing wrong things or sneaky things and gossipy things and things that you know are wrong, and then you think that when the big moral question confronts you, when the Nazis are knocking on your door and are threatening you and intimidating you, and you think oh boy, the only way out of this is to give up the innocent people that I'm harboring and protecting to save my life, if you think that when the big moral dilemmas come, that you're going to be able to do the right thing then, when you're not able to do the right thing in all the little cases, then you're mistaken. You're going to fold, right? You will not have built up the kind of moral character. Right? Virtue is a kind of habit. I think this is my view. I sort of subscribe to a eudaimonian view of morality,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's the same thing with intellectual virtues like critical thinking and skepticism and rationality. These are habits of mind that we have to cultivate in ourselves and practice hard. You got to
Mm-hmm.
sort of work at it. You got to read a lot about the stuff, and the best practice is just get into a lot of arguments with people. I mean, I don't mean go pick fights with people, but I mean, like, do hangouts like this and talk to people, preferably people who have very different views from your own. And whatever you do, don't just read books that agree with you. And one of the things that happens, one of the sort of biggest obstacles to sort of getting better at critical thinking is interacting only with the ideas that you agree with. So people will sort of subscribe to channels of people that they agree with and nobody else. They'll read books, just Christian literature or just anti-religious tracts and books and
Sure.
websites and stuff like that. And
Well,
so
one of the things that we try to encourage here at the New Covenant Group is to bring together, and this is something that we had talked about previously, is bringing together people that have different opinions and getting them to know each other as humans, so that conversation can be had about the individual differences without it being an in-your-face aggro butting heads discussion.
Aggro, you must be a gamer. Yeah, my wife's a gamer, so
And
that's how I know about it.
I'd like to welcome Bob to the conversation.
Hey, Bob.
Hi, it's been a little dramatic around here, I guess.
I
Bob,
hope everything's okay.
Bob, I owe you an apology. I was told that I was talking right over top of you during the show because the audio wasn't coming through, and I had no idea that there were sounds coming out of your mouth, and I couldn't see anybody. I had only audio to go on, so I couldn't even tell when someone was trying to talk. So I apologize for that.
Oh, not a problem. Sometimes it can be hard to do that because Skype will actually then sound cancel sometimes too. So it's.
Oh yeah, well that might have been what happened because I think I answered one question that you asked, and I don't think I heard from you again after that. And apparently you were talking.
Yeah.
Bob, just to catch you up real quick, we were talking about, or Ozzy was talking about how critical thinking is a habit of the mind. And he was talking about that in reference to the fact that he was what was the conversation that couched that?
Well, we were I was sort of putting it in the context of critical thinking. We have a tendency. It had to do with attribution theory, and how
Yes.
we tend to
How people are irrational.
Yeah, well, people are irrational, but we tend to assume that the way we come by our beliefs is through rationality, and the way that other people arrive at their beliefs tends to be through causes and motivations, and not by good reasoning. We tend to be very uncharitable. And I was characterizing sort of the idea of critical thinking. Well, the practice of getting better at critical thinking, I think, is one that can be understood as a habit of mind, like a martial art. You want it to become reflexive. You want to keep practicing it, keep practicing, keep practicing. It's like the idea of practicing moral virtues. Yeah. You want it to become a kind of ingrained habit of mind, so that your tendency when you confront a claim, even one that is conducive to what you already believe and advances what you already believe, right away your BS detectors start to go off, and you start to scan it. And this is a skill that we come by with only great difficulty and effort. And if you don't put in the effort, then you don't get good at it. I mean, you can go through your whole life being really crappy at this and never getting better. And it's frustrating talking to people who don't know a single fallacy and spew one fallacious argument at another. But it's not because they're dumb. It's because there's nothing natural about critical thinking. It's the most unnatural thing in the world.
Yeah. If you've not had it modeled for you, it's not likely you're going to think of it on your own. Yeah. You know, one thing I was hoping that we would have gotten to, and I was waiting for the end to get to, and that was that I was hoping to make the comment that it seems to me that in a sense, presuppositionalism is an attempt to take advantage of the epistemological problem. But I really don't find the Christian version of it satisfying and coherent. Now, I say that as a theist, you know, and I'm more perhaps properly labeled an agnostic theist. I recognize the problem of being certain about any of this, and you know, so it strikes me as being very unsatisfying. But also it's an attempt to take advantage of that problem by also talking to people who aren't aware, never stop to think about, wow, this is a problem, isn't it? You know, and so they kind of ambush you.
Yeah, they take advantage of the fact that people are not going to have considered a lot of these questions, or not, if they have considered them, not considered them very deeply. And then, of course, you know, once they've got the person kind of, you know, backpedaling, then they sort of spring them on them oh well, I've got the goods, boy, I can answer these questions, you know, in the hopes that people will sort of rush to this or be impressed with it, or walk away thinking, oh well, they must have something. But I think I sort of said this in the video I did. I didn't have an opportunity to say this during the show, but I think that as an apologetic, it's very bad, or rather, as an evangelical tool, it's very bad. I don't think that humiliating people and dominating them is one that leaves people favorably disposed towards the Christian message. I'm not a Christian. I think Christianity is false. But I mean, I grew up in a Christian culture, and a lot of my own values are predicated on Christian values. So I mean, I think Christianity can be and is a serious religion, a demanding religion, and it requires sort of an unflinching self-examination and can be a force for good in a person's life. So I'm not an enemy of Christianity, even though I think it's false. I merely think it's false. I'm not an enemy of Christianity. I'm not out to sort of talk everyone out of their beliefs. I think the world would be a better place without religion. But that being said, you know, if you're an apologist with an evangelical objective, presuppositionalism seems like the wrong way to go about it. It seems boastful and arrogant. It seems insulting to people. People walk away, especially from people like Cy and the Cyclones. They walk away sort of feeling cheated. They feel like, well, this was some kind of semantic trick. This was, they can smell something's not right in the argument, but they can't put their finger on it in the moment. And it actually takes a lot of work and digging around to figure out things that are wrong with it. I said this in my own video that if as someone who would kind of like to see religion slowly go extinct, if this was the only apologetic that Christians had to offer, my work's done. I don't have to worry because they're not converting anybody. They're not getting any new people this way. The only way they're going to get new converts is by breeding them, literally raising their children up in it. They're not going to convert too many people this way.
Well,
they're going to lose
choir only. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, the first time I heard the presuppositional approach, it took me a while to figure out, what the structure was and what they were doing. But I'll tell you, I came alive. It was actually during the show. I think I gave them about about 20 minutes into it, and and then I had enough of it. But it is it is a very frustrating thing. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious, Bob. You're a pastor, right?
Was
okay. You were a pastor, okay. But then I presume you went to seminary, or you've done some serious study of religion, of Christianity. Was it sort of apologetic, sort of a big part of your self-education and instruction? And if so, did presuppositionalism play no part in that? Because I've always been curious how prominent this is, within sort of the Christian community. It's gotten fashionable of late, but I wonder, did you encounter it before?
I ran into it until I ran into it on NCG. I had a rather, they call me the unconventional pastor. I was, raised Episcopalian, became a fundamentalist after my mentor went through a crisis of faith, and not choosing fundamentalism, but deciding to go to a school where they know what they know and they're not going to have these doubts. I went to Bob Jones University. I became very ill, was unable to finish, but eventually, ended up, pastoring in 3 different churches, but the whole while, as I sought out something that made coherent sense in education, it began to really just fall apart for me. I didn't lose faith in the notion of God and the presence of God, but I certainly lost faith in Christianity as a tradition, and came to admire Jesus as somebody I now see as somebody who tried to really confront a lot of this, and was then rewritten in a sense to turn him back into the very thing he was against, and at a point where I have these beliefs, but I don't find them compelling, and I can't for the life of me understand why anybody should be required to have them. And if it makes sense to you, wonderful. If it doesn't make sense, I don't see how it possibly could be a problem to God. So in a sense, it's made my faith something that's of in a sense of no consequence. It's not an issue.
Yeah, I think if you're a person of faith and you have doubts, the presuppositional apologetic is going to seem like a great refuge. It's a great place to go to get rid of doubts. It assuages doubts. It promises certainty. That's a huge comfort to some people.
I think that's an interesting psychological variable right there. The fact
That to me is a red flag, though. I'll tell you. But
Yeah, it is. I don't. I mean, but I sort of, as I see it, and Christopher will know more about this because I don't know that much about the empirical literature on the subject. But I know that there's certain sort of personality types and temperaments that sort of tend to be consistent through a person's life, and they have various scales and various axes in personality inventories. Sort of the idea of an authoritarian personality type and stuff like that. There are some people who are very, very comfortable with insecurity, or not insecurity, but uncertainty, and there are some people that require a lot of certainty, and that apparently this is a very stable characteristic in a person's life. And so if we sort of imagine people distributed along a kind of bell curve, some people, most people sort of clustered in the middle, who can accommodate, who likes, some amount of confidence and certainty, but can accommodate some intellectual discomfort, and then there you got other people who are just, I don't care, they're very sort of, slack, and inconsistencies don't trouble them too much. But then you have other people who simply cannot stand that, and I think that has a tendency to drive people into easy answers.
Yeah, and which also unfortunately means there's always going to be a certain number of people who find this very appealing. And I don't know about you, Chris, but I was thinking, I ran into a number of people that I would classify as borderline personality disorder.
Yeah, I mean, there's, I don't know how clinical I would go with it, but certainly it's a self-selecting group, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And there's an attraction to it. Now, I'll tell you this, I was brought up in a home where my dad was sick and mom were very, very critical. They weren't hostile, but I was brought up as a inept adult in a sense, and where the criticism that I received was really an attempt to help me with what was lacking in my adultness, in everything that I thought and did and whatever. So I think that in a sense there was this authoritarianism to fundamentalism that was its first appeal. But when I got to be familiar with it and thinking about it, I was fortunate enough that I was also raised in a home with some rather intelligent people and intelligent siblings, and it just wasn't going to work for me. It just had to fall apart, and it took about 5 or 6 years, I think, for it to really fall apart.
But the people that are drawn to that level of certainty, I mean, you can't. This is where I do engage in a little bit of armchair psychologizing. It doesn't seem like a leap of logic to say that there is some control variable being juggled in the mix there for people that want that level of certainty. That seems like a certain amount of wanting to control their knowledge. They need it to be certain. They need it to be absolute. There can't be uncertainty. There can't be any level of something that they don't know for certain, that they don't have control of. It needs to be compartmentalized. It needs to be controlled. It needs to be certain.
I think it also means, therefore, that this is usually not for the new believer. Usually, it's for the believer who's already experienced some problems they're uncomfortable with. I'll tell you, as a pastor and as someone who had even looked at various different other beliefs, very, very few people ever convert to a belief system because they hear the arguments and are persuaded. Most people convert to a belief system because somebody who is already in that belief system reaches out to them in a manner they find significant, touches them, helps them in a way that they experience as very helpful, and they begin to embrace it and then get brought into the paradigm and begin to embrace it as a community that they have felt brought into. And that's really the way most people convert.
And the bottom line is you're underlining the fact that Ozzy and I made earlier, that people make the most important decisions based on emotional choices, which makes them irrational. They're not weighing.
Let's just be honest about it. Yeah.
What's that?
I said it's not necessarily a bad thing either.
No.
It's just, let's be honest about it. I mean, I want to surround myself with people who respect me, people who can love me and people I can love back. And in fact, one of the things we're trying to do with the New Covenant group is we're trying to say we want to have some conversation with people we think are just wonderful people to have a conversation with.
Exactly.
And the issue that would normally divide us isn't even an issue, in a sense, for that at all, in the least.
Mm-hmm. No, there are certain things that we embrace that people might think are weird. Like, let's embrace the fact that we're a little bit irrational, but we're also embracing the fact that we're compassionate. And what's irrational about us? Well, the fact that we make decisions that are emotional. Well, what's one of those decisions that we make? Well, that we decide to be in a cult called the Cult of Honesty that has no dogma in it, and that we have awesome conversations.
Well, I'll tell you what. I'm not going to say to my wife what Captain Spock's dad said to his wife. It seemed like a good idea at the time. No, this is a relationship, and I could care less if the decision I made to become involved with my wife, we've been married now for 25 years. We have a wonderful relationship. Was this a rational decision? I
hope
don't
not.
give a damn. That isn't the point. It's a wonderful relationship, and so what have you.
So
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'd sort of want to sort of split up decisions on specific courses of action, like major life decisions, like who you're going to fall in love with and who you marry and stuff like that. Clearly, it's hard to be rational about those things, and if you only listen to your heart, of course, you can end up in a disastrous situation, right? We've all known people who've made terrible choices or repeatedly make terrible choices because they're governed by their heart. But of course, the heart wants what the heart wants, and of course you can't will yourself to love what in theory is the right person, right? So yeah, some accommodation for just raw feelings has to be made, no matter how strong one's commitment is to rationality.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, there's so much psychological literature now that shows that emotion is leading and tugging us along, and that so much of our reasoning process about things like values and morality and life choices are post hoc rationalization. I mean, there's just a lot of literature on this now. And we recognize that in others effortlessly. We just don't recognize it in us, right? We seem to be really particularly susceptible to our own rationalizing, even when we're not doing it consciously.
We may be the only ones.
Yeah. It never seems to fool other people. Other people see right through us.
I know, and that's the funny part. That's why I've heard the expression blind spots. That's why I like using that term. Everybody has blind spots, but those same blind spots that we have in ourselves, we are so good at pointing out in other people.
Yeah, we spend our lives also overcoming any discomfort or dissonance, or desensitizing ourselves to our own thing, which is, I think, another reason why it's always good to be in dialogue, because it is only when you're in dialogue with people who may have a very different point of view that you begin to go, oh, that makes sense. Well, hey, I don't have a good response to that, and it helps. I think the truth is, even it'll at least raise the bar so that we become better atheists and better theists.
But let's bring this conversation back around a little bit to presuppositionalism, to the point where that level of conversation, the conversation we're talking about, is a meat and potatoes, I can sink my teeth into it kind of conversation that they are disabusing us from having.
Yeah.
And that's emotionally unsatisfying to us, right? That kind of gets our dander up as people that are used to a certain etiquette of conversation.
Right.
Where there's a social contract, where there is a free expression in the public domain, or in the the court of public opinion, where people exchange opinions in a certain way, and they're just like pulling the rug from under that and being like, no, first you need to accept and admit that you're borrowing from my worldview. So it's just like, once again, needle off of the record. all of a sudden the focus of whatever you're talking about is not the topic of what you're talking about. It is now the spitting contest of your worldview or my worldview. Which one are we talking from? I think it's mine. And unless you admit that it is, I win this spitting contest. Or you know what I mean? It's just like, what? Hold on a second.
They do this often enough that they get good at it. And so if you're not experienced with this, you're an amateur and you're dealing with some people who know how to pull this off. It can be very, very, very frustrating.
Mm-hmm.
But that's one of the things that sort of is a violation of the, sort of the norms of civil discourse is when they get really rehearsed at this, very, very practiced at this, the conversation seems really contrived and artificial. There's no sense in which you're having a conversation. You really get the sense that they are simply reading from a script, and they're just waiting. They're just listening for an opportunity to use the next line in their script. They've got this sort of this playbook that they're using.
Right.
And sometimes they trip themselves up. I sort of in my video I sort of gave an example. Well, yeah, it was actually John F. McDropout who was in a conversation with someone, and this kind of thing happened. But they'll be playing this game of how do you know, how do you know, how do you know, and then someone will come up with something that really is hard to doubt. You know, they'll say something like, "Well, I can know that I'm not omniscient," or I know that I'm not omniscient, right? Now, what is this presupper going to say? What is the cyclone going to say? Well, if they're thoughtful, they'll think about it and they'll realize, okay, well, if the person knows or that they're not omniscient, that would have to be right, because if they were wrong, right, there's no way that argument can go through, right?
Alex Botton says things like that, like, how do you know that I'm, that I'm not God? I know
that's right. Yeah, and I don't know if he originated that or not, but it's very clever. I mean, I saw a YouTube video where someone sort of made a video of how to shut up a presuppositionalist, right? Now, my feeling is, look, you don't want to do that. You don't that's not the way to proceed in an argument. It's fun to sort of turn the tables on them and stump them and watch their sort of gears whirring for a while there, but really, I think that you just have to sort of insist on having an honest conversation and being honest when you answer those questions. But it's really hard to be honest and forthright all the way through when you can tell they are not even listening to you. They're just waiting to recite something. So they ask you, how do you know that you're not omniscient? And then you say, well, what's the matter with you? Didn't you hear what I said before you asked the question? If it turns out I'm wrong, that I'm not omniscient, it means I'm omniscient. If I was omniscient, presumably I wouldn't be thinking that I'm not omniscient. Surely I can't be wrong about that, can I? Now, of course, there are ways that you could be wrong about that. For instance, if your thinking doesn't work right, if your brain isn't working right, the whole process by which you infer that I couldn't be wrong about that could be misleading you. So you can never get out of the trap. Even when you think you've got something that I've got something rock solid I couldn't doubt. There's always the problem that if there's something wrong with your mind, right? If your memory is failing you, such that you think that you're using a word consistently across two sentences, but you're not, right? As long as those nightmare scenarios are introduced as logically possible and sufficient to undermine knowledge, then you've got a problem. Now, I think that those are not conditioned. That those nightmare scenarios are not sufficient to undermine the possibility of knowledge. But if you assume that, then you've got a problem.
We're always operating from that biosemiotic reality that we are our thinking and our processing is through multiple layers of sensory perception, of our brain triaging the ideas, putting things together, and as a result, there's a sense in which there's really many layers between our consciousness and what it is we're conscious of, so that that you could always introduce the possibility of something malfunctioning there, and but it seems like we're all in this similar boat together, and I would even think, well, as long as what we're doing seems to be working for us, why isn't that good enough in many respects?
Yeah, and that's that level of being humble that they seem to be lacking. Right, like I enjoy the discourse we're all having right now, because we're all being very humble about the limits of our knowledge and the limits of what we can know, maybe even in our lifetimes. But
why do we even need to know this stuff?
Say that again.
why would we even need to know? I mean, it almost presupposes the need, and
Yeah,
it's
that's a
wonderful
really
to think
good
about.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah, my feeling on this is, look, having a complete worldview and a very secure worldview is certainly extremely desirable. And of course, if your worldview contains inconsistencies, then by definition, there's something wrong with your worldview. But that doesn't mean that it's all junk. It just means that one or more propositions happen to conflict with some other propositions, right?
Yeah, but so what?
So what, right? That
It's called growing up. Yeah.
yeah. So it's the distinction between what is necessary and what is desirable. I mean, what is desirable is to have a complete worldview. I mean, omniscience is desirable, right?
So you start with a framework, and you fix the patches as you grow up.
Yeah. Yeah. I have to move along here. I'm so sorry I wasn't able to stay in the show. My brother had an accident and he was out there on the road and cold and hit a deer. He just flew in for a funeral, and then my son was in the hospital just yesterday. So we've had a lot of drama in here, and I am exhausted.
Have a good night, my man.
I gotta get to sleep here, and then what have you. But yeah, and Ozzy, so nice to meet you. I appreciated your contribution. I thought you brought in a very well-articulated, clear understanding of just what's going on with presuppositionalism and what it is, and I really appreciate that. And I hope that our recording of that ends up scoring a lot of hits, because I thought it was really good.
Oh, good. Well, thank you very much. It's very nice. And it was nice to finally see you, actually, and to properly hear you, because we had some technical problems. So I'm glad now I can see you and I can hear you. It was very nice to meet you, Bob. Thank you very much.
I'm calling you Ozzy, but is that what most people call you?
Well, everyone calls me Ozzy. No, it's not my real name. Ozzy is short for Ozymandias Ramses II, which is just a username that I created. And just to say for the record, I'm not particularly touchy about people knowing my name or using my name or anything like that. But the reason is I have another YouTube channel, and I've got a couple of thousand subscribers on that channel. It has nothing to do with any of these controversies. It's a kind of how-to channel, and I use a different username there, and I use my real name there. And what I didn't want was, if I start injecting myself into this discourse, which I just started doing differently, I know that I'm going to ruffle some feathers, someone's going to get ticked off, and I didn't want to pollute my other channel with a lot of nasty comments and stuff like that. And by nature, I can be very confrontational, but I don't think I'm a dick. So I don't set out to offend people, but I know that people do get offended in this kind of discourse. So that's why I created this whole name. And Ozzy is because I just love the poem Ozymandias by Shelley. And it's a nickname that I used online in Internet Relay Chat when I was having discussions about this. So I thought it was apt to use it. So, and Ozzy for short. That's all. But if someone knows my name, calls me my name, it's not the end of the world. I have videos where I use my name already on my channel. So it's no great secret there.
Okay, it's so nice to meet you. And,
likewise.
We'll talk to the rest of you later. Take care.
All
Good night, Bob.
So yeah, I thought that really touched on some important variables, because it's just a different mindset. The way that the presuppositional approaches things and a non-presuppositional will approach things.
Yeah, well, as I'm sort of at pains to point out, there are different kinds of presuppositionalists. There are the two kinds we've been talking about, the cyclones, and then what I take to be sort of the more serious, high-minded presuppositionalists who sort of aren't just trying to embarrass people and shame people and shut people up. I mean, Seitan Bruggencate he's actually on record. I mean, he did this instructional video.
Yes.
Where he's teaching other people his style of apologetics and how to practice it. And he literally says the point of this is to shut people up, to shut mouths.
Yes.
It's a horrible thing, right? This is just a terrible admission, right? So, I mean, if they're offended by anything I've said, when I sort of suggest that they've got a lunkheaded view, too bad. This is your idea of the point of the presuppositional is not to presuppositional apologetics is not to shut people up, but to enlighten people, to sort of bring to mind an understanding that that worldviews are different, and they can come into conflict, and then how do you evaluate between them? There's no neutral standpoint. Actually, this brings to mind something that I wanted to mention. It was in connection with something you said at the beginning, and I've forgotten what it was. But the point I wanted to make at that point was that I don't actually agree with with this idea that worldviews are hermetically sealed. I do agree that you can't step out of all worldviews. I don't believe there's a neutral ground from which to evaluate worldviews. But it doesn't follow that that we're hermetically sealed in our worldviews, or should be. And one of the things that presuppositionalists of all sorts assert is that you must never abandon your presuppositions, that it's wrong to abandon your presuppositions. You must always operate within your presuppositions. But if that were true, if that were literally true, a presuppositionalist couldn't evaluate my worldview internally and perform an internal critique, because in order to evaluate my worldview and effectuate an internal critique of my worldview, he or she would have to say, for the sake of argument, bracket their own belief in God and try to understand and evaluate my worldview using only the resources in my worldview. Well, surely they can do that, right? I mean, anybody can do that, and they can, and they do. But that's all we mean by when we say, for the sake of argument, I just want you to evaluate, look at things through my eyes, try to understand, right? That no one's actually asking you to stop believing in your God and look at it from my perspective. And so there's this weird idea. It's as if they think that worldviews are completely separate and that there's no overlap. Look, all you have to be able to do is have some points of contact with another person. And then you can see things from their worldview. And it's never the case that you actually have to abandon anything you do believe for the purposes of argument. You merely have to pretend that you are abandoning your beliefs for the purposes of argument. That's all you do. That's what it means to argue for the purposes of argument, to proceed arguendo, right? That's all that it means, is to say, okay, I will bracket and suspend my beliefs. Now, what they're really concerned about is people who proceed. That is, they're worried about apologists who proceed and try to argue for Christianity from a purely secular standpoint and use an evidentialist apologetic. That's really what they're trying to scotch. They don't like that. And
yeah, I had an
they think that there's a kind of impropriety there.
I had an opportunity to talk to a presuppositional apologist, and it was a nice lengthy discussion. It was about 2 hours. His name was Dustin Seegers. And he is really articulate, and we had a great discussion. And in doing research for that particular talk and interview, I found a speech that he did where he articulated in no uncertain terms why he thought that the presuppositional argument was a better apologetic than all others. And it kind of goes like this. I don't have my notes about that in front of me right now, but I'll see if I can dust off the cobwebs and see if I can remember it. But it goes something like this. If we hold God's standards to secular standards, we're placing secular standards above God's standards. And we're also saying that secular standards are now autonomous of God's standards. And we're also holding secular standards as somehow above our standards that we need to reach towards. And that's unacceptable. What we need to do is start from the Bible so that our standards are the standards by which we strive towards, and they are also the standards by which they need to strive towards. Something like that.
Yeah. Well, they seem to think that to argue by bracketing some of their faith commitments. So let's say that you're someone like William Lane Craig. Okay, now William Lane Craig never abandons what he believes when he's arguing, does he? No, of course not. But he's able to, because he's an evidentialist, when he's trying to convince someone that that Jesus rose from the dead and that God raised him from the dead, he marshals arguments that a secular-minded person who doesn't already believe that Jesus is God and was raised from the dead by God, he marshals arguments that someone could agree with, and then he hopes that the only conclusion that they will be able to come to is that Jesus rose from the dead and was raised by God. That's what the conclusion he's trying to argue. He doesn't start by assuming that, and the reason he doesn't want to start by assuming that is he knows that other people don't assume that. And he's trying to convince them of his conclusion, and he doesn't want to argue in a circle, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's the point of the evidentialist approach. Now, there are apologists, presuppositional apologists, who will say flat out, and they all seem to think this to some degree, but some of them will state it right out. Like Greg Bahnsen wrote an article called, it's something to the effect of on the impiety of evidentialism, or on the impiety of proving the resurrection, or something like that. Something to that effect. Look up Bahnsen and impiety and presuppositionalism, and you'll find it. It's out there, and it's a short article. It's not very long, it's written for fellow Christians who are interested in apologetics, where he's basically trying to sell them on the idea that, look, there's only one way to proceed here. That you're selling out, you're abandoning, you're denying. It's just like Peter denying Jesus when you adopt the evidentialist approach, and that you are saying that the way to evaluate these theological claims is by a secular, non-theistic standard, and that's the wrong standard, and it is an insult to God. And another reason is they think that an evidentialist approach isn't really what we want, because according to Scripture, what Paul says that what you're supposed to do is sort of express the hope that is within you. The full conviction is what it says. And well, wait a minute, the full conviction? I mean, how are you going to get there with evidentialism? So I can understand that part of their argument, that part of their position, because if you present a probabilistic case, oh well, if this is true and this is true and this is true, then likely this happened, and therefore maybe Jesus rose from the dead. And if maybe he rose from the dead, well then maybe it was God who rose him from the dead, and maybe that's the Christian God. And you can't sort of generate a sort of a full-bodied, robust Christian faith, right? There's not a lot of conviction in that, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're supposed to have an apologetic that expresses the full conviction. But I think there's a problem here, and that is that I think in that passage Paul's not really talking about what we think of as apologetics. He's talking about when you're proselytizing. That's not defending the faith. Proselytizing is and spreading the good news is different than sort of answering questions and trying to make rational the whole story and make it consistent with everything else that you believe. I mean, I think apologetics in its practice tends to be an intellectually dishonest pursuit, because it's arguing in reverse. You start with your conclusions, and then you sort of reverse engineer a set of premises that will get you to that conclusion. But in principle, apologetics isn't that way. Apologetics is just trying to make sense of your theology. You make it all square, make it all internally consistent, make it externally consistent, that is, make it consistent with the facts that you already believe independently, mundane facts about the world and history and science and all that. I mean, that's perfectly good. I mean, that's what people should do. Sort of rationalizing your world, and I don't mean merely rationalizing, I mean making rational, making sense of your worldview, is perfectly good. I mean, every person should do that, including every Christian. But you don't have to be sort of dishonest in the process. But the presuppositionalist really wants a full conviction and wants an apologetic that will lead to that conviction. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that it's apologetics that has to lead to that sense. But I'm not going to dictate what their evangelism should be. But if that's what they think, I think that it's going to backfire on them. I don't think it convinces many people. What I think it does is it really feels good for Christians who are who want to feel that they're not the irrational ones, that they're the rational ones, that they own logic, that sort of thing.
I think that's a good point. I mean, but I think once again it comes right back to the point that there are people that want to have certainty about, like, well, of course logic is the way that it is because
God's nature.
God is nature. Well,
Or no, that's God's nature. Yeah.
God is logic.
Yeah.
God is logical, so therefore, of course.
Yeah, there's one fellow by the name of Matt Slick who is a founder of CARM. I mean, this is a guy who's almost his entire ministry is built up around this transcendental argument based on logic, and it's exactly the same problem that the presuppositionalists have with it, with explaining logic. It's just a completely vacuous argument. In the end, the account is empty. Nothing's been explained. None of the problems that concerned logicians are addressed by this. But most people have never considered for a moment, how logic works and what makes logic logic, and why we heed things like the principle of non-contradiction, and why you're uttering nonsense when you violate an inference rule and such things, and so they just get stumped. So that's another kind of technique. And transcendental arguments generally have this problem that they tend to sort of rely on stumping people, and then they offer this kind of thin account, and then they say, well, I've got an account. Well, it's not much of an account. I don't think anyone should be impressed with it.
I'm sorry, I zoned out for 1 second because I was just looking at some of the comments, and we do have, obviously there are enough people to be leaving comments, which is super impressive in my opinion.
At this hour?
Tell me about it. So there's talk about brights.
Oh yeah. Well. Brights are, there was this idea that we need a word for atheists and agnostics and people who are sort of committed to rationality and skepticism and stuff like that. And the word atheist is so tarnished, it's so tainted, it's so stigmatized. Let's choose another word. The idea was it's sort of, let's choose a word that's kind of positive. It like when gay people decided we're going to make gay the word, right? It's sort of a positive word, an affirmative word, the brights. But I think that backfired. I think that was a terrible PR move. It had exactly the wrong effect the implication is that if you're not a bright, you're a dim, from a PR standpoint, it was a terrible idea because it fed right into the popular stereotype that atheists, think mighty highly of their intelligence and think they're smarter than everybody else. Right? It was sort of an unfortunate miscalculation. But I think it was Daniel Dennett and who sort of came up with that. And I thought, oh God, I really hate that term. I hope that this does not catch on because it's not going to work. It's going to backfire. And fortunately, it died at kind of a quick death. Everyone kind of got embarrassed about it rather quickly, I think. I don't know that anybody really goes around calling themselves a bright.
No.
I think that sort of fell through really quickly.
And then there was the Atheist Plus movement, wasn't there?
Well, that's still sort of an ongoing thing. That was AtheismPlus is a group of people who are atheists and self-described skeptics, but who are committed to causes of social progress, like contemporary feminism and gay rights, those sorts of things. I have no truck with AtheismPlus myself. I think that there's a little bit too much ideology there, and I don't want to sort of start naming names and slagging people. Not that I'm afraid of doing it, but it just doesn't seem appropriate to do it here. But one of the problems I have with the whole AtheismPlus thing is that I see in that movement a kind of censoriousness and a narrow-mindedness and an ideological character where they don't want to listen to other people's objections and other people's views, and you're told that you don't get it if you're not on board with their views and things like that.
Isn't that an est phrase?
What's that?
Getting it. Isn't that an est phrase?
Oh wow! Geez, I didn't know anyone even still remembered est.
Hey man, I am pulling. That's a deep cut. I'm pulling from the Wayback Machine.
Way back in the '70s with est, in the '60s and '70s. I'm old enough to remember est, but. Yeah, so people, don't get it, and they're sort of banning people and kicking people off, and and any kind of objection to their progressivist cause and their methods and the explanatory models that they use is sort of construed as misogyny or sexism or worse, and. I don't see a lot of skepticism going on there. I see a lot of groupthink going on there. So my feeling there is that this is almost, I think that we all have to sort of police our own movements. Feminists need to police their movements and sort of rid themselves of the craziest elements in their ranks. MRMs, people in the men's rights movement, need to do that. They need to sort of purge and marginalize and ostracize the most strident elements within their movement. And I think we as atheists and skeptics, those of us who are, not everyone here necessarily, but need to sort of do the same thing with that. I think AtheismPlus is not particularly a good example of critical thinking and a commitment to rationality and open-mindedness. So there's been a split, there's been this rift as a result. And some people say, well, can't we just sort of? There's a larger enemy, There's all these theists out there and fundamentalists, and they outnumber us. We shouldn't be divisive. We should rally around. My feeling is no. The enemy is not theism. The enemy is irrationality. Theism, in my view, is just a species of irrationalism. Mm-hmm. There are worse forms of irrationalism than simple theism. There are strains of theism that are really bad, and strains of theism that are fairly benign, and I have no concern about them. But irrationality is the problem, and it comes in the form not just of theism and religion, but superstition and also political ideologies.
Sure.
And I don't want that in my skeptical atheist movement if I have anything to say about it. So I'm not concerned if people say, well, this is divisiveness. We need to, circle the wagons. We need to not air our dirty laundry in public. No, what my enemy is irrationality, and a closed mind. That's my enemy. And I don't care if they also happen to be atheists or call themselves atheists, or if they call themselves, if they're self-described skeptics and rationalists. I don't care. That's just of no consequence to me. We need to sort of, push those people away. So I don't care. I know this is going to be controversial, but too bad. It's just how I feel about it. The enemy is irrationality, not theism.
Gotcha. Well, on that note, I think I'm going to end the post-show hangout. I think we've gotten a little bit away from the pre-sup topic that we had originally started with on the show.
We sure did.
Or on the place. The show. The place is the show that we were on. And now we've kind of diverged a little bit, and we still have 13 viewers, which still kind of blows my mind. If you wanted to continue this on your own post-show hangout, post-show hangout, you can feel free to do that if people are of interest for that. But I have to admit, it is 12:30, and I need to get up early for work.
Yeah, it's a little late for me. I would love to stay and talk. I love doing these kinds of hangouts. I've had a terrific time since I've started injecting myself in this conversation. I've done a lot of hangouts with people, and I've enjoyed every one of them. They've all been fun, and people have been really, really very nice, and I've had some very good comments and some unflattering ones, but on the whole it's been a positive experience. If other people are interested in doing this sort of thing, you can always give me a shout, and if we can find a time to do it, I'm happy to do these things. I quite enjoy them. So thank you, Christopher. This was a lot of fun. And I know it's not easy doing what you do. Having hosted some of these, I know it's not easy.
I hear you,
a lot
brother.
of juggling.
And I also like to thank Jonathan for taking the time to hang out, and Alana, and Dr. Jones stopped in for a little bit. I know that he turned his video off, but I know that he's still passively listening while he's doing some other things. And I'm going to hang up and thank everybody for hanging out. And don't forget that this Wednesday we have the Cult of Honesty hang. So if you're interested, go to the Cult of Honesty Facebook page and find out more information there. All right, talk to everybody later. See you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.